Hey neighbors, the handyman here with Initiative Coffee Company along with self-proclaimed cool guy Jake Del Maro. Today we're going through DDEX-02-16 Boltsmelter's book. Writer John Rossamagno, editors Claire Hoffman, Chris Tulach, and Travis Woodall. This is a 4-hour mod set for Tier 1 play, tuned specifically for 5-second level characters. There's already some assumed buy-in with this module. Kicks off in an unwinnable combat scenario, followed by exploration, several social encounters, and in a more matched but still challenging combat. Part 1. I'm on a boat. The module starts off in a ship with the characters protecting a noted NPC Fergus. Immediately upon reaching port, the ship is attacked by the Cult of the Crushing Wave. Combat is not meant to be overcome. This is actually an exploration challenge in disguise, focused on escape and moving Fergus to a safer location. If the characters are overwhelmed, the cult steals the book in the possession of Fergus. If the party escapes the ship, they are rewarded with a substantial exploration section as they flee the pursuing cult. Jake, we start off with, I guess...
No, we're not there yet. I am not self-proclaimed. I am just a cool guy.
All right, fine.
Okay, now your question.
We start off with, some would say a DM no, unwinnable combat scenario. I am not opposed to it. Personally, in this mod, I don't think the odds are overwhelming enough to telegraph that it's not winnable.
Well, at my tables, of course, we have Brian Thomas, who frequently uses one person to hit another person with his grappling feat.
Like
and sometimes it just doesn't feel good when he tries to grapple an octopus that apparently is like the size of a kraken. That is actually something I want to address in the mod. Buy-in, you know what? I've harped on it for the last however many times, like 8 mods. I'll do it again. Sometimes you just gotta tell the party that they're gonna just do stuff for you.
Yeah,
it happens. But my big issue is in the mod itself. And then I'll Quentin Tarantino backwards, is that the octopus is supposed to have the buy-in of, like, it's causing the boat to, like, crush. In 10 rounds, the boat is underwater.
Yeah, and they don't really do anything to change any just generic it's
it's just a giant
creature,
octopus,
so
yeah.
They don't really do anything to adjust that.
Either the ways that can be fixed or are to make it more overwhelming for a party, because you did mention it doesn't feel like it's too overwhelming. You got somebody with a high AC, it's +4s to hit. That's still like, you know, let's say it was 20 AC, you still only have a 20% chance of hitting them. And if your dice are cold, they're really cold. So the way to get around that, I think, as I've like thought about it a little bit more, is have multiple octopuses, and in that same route, make the people that are actually manning the octopuses that much more present. They're just destroying the ship all over, and that could add enough of that DM like push to be like, you're not supposed to like fight this. You can, and if there is a somewhat turn and tide in battle, it's like, hey, somebody looks over the side of the boat. There's 15 more guys coming up. It's not looking good. So there's ways to add it, and I definitely
there's a I think it's in the AL pre-adventure for Saltmarsh. There's like an encounter with just tentacles that rip through a boat, right? So you could, if you have Saltmarsh, I know these modules are supposed to be independent of other source books, but if you happen to have one of the 9,000 copies of Saltmarsh laying around that if you've run at all at any convention in the last 2 years, maybe take it.
You got it. Who knows?
Take inspiration from that. Just find a way to make this combat more
menacing,
clearly overwhelming, right?
Yeah, that was something I think is important, and just to be careful here, like you should almost every end of every round just say to the party, it's like there's more guys coming, and like humans are swimming to the boat. They're not like, you know, roping their way in. It's like they're going to the boat and like making it like almost like a sea of guys. And I think that's a quick way of doing it. After the octopus dilemma I'm having right now, I want to address the beginning of this mod. You get to interact as Fergus. Fergus is a guy that actually could be used as a means to further a character's own design. You know, what did you have this morning to eat? ask questions that like make them think.
Yeah.
And I think that is an important thing to do. Then immediately after octopus attack, I don't know. I haven't had a situation where the cultists have run away with the book.
Sure.
Often, the one time that did happen, it was Fergus got removed with the book.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of dropping a live hand grenade into your lap. So just,
Sure.
like, be clear, like, hey, this guy's important. He's got something. And, like, push it to not be a super long combat. Because there's other stuff you can spend time doing.
And honestly, the point of part 1 isn't the combat, right? The real
Correct.
focal point is the exploration, the pursuit, and the chase sequence after.
Yeah.
If you don't spend a bunch of time on combat, you can really give the chase sequence some more attention.
Agreed.
There's a bunch of different ways to do this. I think they kind of shake out pretty well. It's better than some of the chase sequences that come up. They're always kind of tricky because it always defaults to like die rolls, which go pretty quickly. So don't expect the chase to take
2 rounds
like
max.
A 30-minute time slot.
Yeah.
It's going to take 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think everything is...
I don't think there's anything crazy that pops out otherwise.
Sure. I like the notion of an unwinnable fight because I don't think all combat should be meant to be won.
Sure.
I just feel like it needs to be telegraphed better.
Or just more menacing.
Or more menacingly. Like, just communicate to the players from the jump that it is not meant to be winnable. And that way, whatever attempts they make to, like, defy the odds, A, seem more heroic. Yeah. And B, like, are their own decisions, right?
Sure.
Part 2. Now what? The party needs some information to pursue the next course of action. They can consult their contacts or engage in several activities costing them downtime. The book the party either protected or lost pulls them toward an elemental node. The second part here, this downtime issue, is interesting to me because, like, I like the notion of giving ways to use downtime because we all have tier 3 and tier 4 characters that, like, have 4,000 downtime days or whatever. Sure. And frankly, like, there's not enough to do with them until you get to the point where you're like, I dumped 300 in a craft skill. I dumped 300 in a language. And, like, that's not something that's viable until you've got, like, a glut of them anyway. So to have these kind of opportunities to spend downtime is really exciting to me.
I kind of have to say there's got to be caution here because the new season, and we're talking about season 9 rules, is you only get downtime upon level up.
Sure.
So, like, in the past, this was a lot more like, okay, feasible. Also, a lot of the mods that we're going to start going into, and including into the tier 2s, which we'll address later, or just in a different video, there's a lot more buy-in with these faction agents. So you're going to so as a DM, be aware that there's a lot of like mods that will eventually just be like they're missing a chunk of a story or a chunk of a mission that feels very natural, but it's because it was addressed to a faction. Yeah.
To that end, if you're going to run season 2, you can make the factions important.
Yeah.
They just don't have a mechanical benefit to your players unless your players have specific background features.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't mean they don't exist in the setting or can't exist in the setting. It just means like there is less like mechanical utility. They're still useful for favors. They're still useful for like advice and those kinds of things. They just, you don't get your free cheap skill training and free magic item or whatever from them. The downfall of these downtime activities is that in a post XP Adventures League, there's not a lot of value in doing most of them, right? Like the reward is like 50 XP for doing this downtime activity. Well, unfortunately, XP doesn't really mean anything these days. So like some of them are like you get 1 consumable magic item, which is great, but by and large, like, you get some XP, and you're gonna have to find ways to like get your players to engage in these activities that don't rely on outdated like currency structures, basically.
Yeah.
Part 3, The Hammers of Moradin. When the party gets back on the trail, they head through a tunnel system. They meet up with a group of dwarves that are trying to recover the codex that Fergus has apparently stolen. After a social encounter with the dwarves, a cult of Black Earth attacks with a hook horror and a young Zorn. Woof, that's a hook horror and a young Zorn. I mean, at least it's a young Zorn, unless you're very strong, right? But like, those are substantial combats, right? Like, hook horrors are nothing to. They're pretty substantial. Zorns are pretty potent, especially, we're dealing with tier 1 here. So definitely be cautious here as a DM.
This is a murder. Like, this can be a very clear murder. It's like, oh my god, I just killed up my entire party. Like, it could go really bad really quick. Yeah. Don't
overlook the social encounter here with the Hammers of Morden. They're kind of a cool faction. To my knowledge, based off the rest that we've gone through, they don't really come up a bunch more in the season, but
could be interesting to a dwarf cleric that probably is
dwarf cleric, or you can bring them up later in the season as a DM if you're looking for an NPC to get characters engaged, or like they're stuck on a puzzle or a riddle or the next step. It's interesting here to find out that Fergus is a thief. Those kinds of aspects. Again,
I don't think there's anything crazy here. Like, I feel like this mod is very straightforward. It's just do your readings, be conscientious of the combat here. But at least that's up to this point. The next part's a little bit different, but at this point, I'm not too worried about if a DM were to read this or pick this up. I'm not going like, watch out. Right. At this point,
there's no like tricks or traps here from the authors to like confuse a DM.
Correct.
There is a little bit of a difference whether or not the players held on to the Elemental Codex. If they lost it, things go a little bit differently. Beyond that, the combat's tough but manageable if you are paying attention and engaged with your players. Part 4, the Earthen Cyst. After the cult encounter, the party encounters a lone drow mage. Fergus and the Hammers of Morden both recognize the drow. He has a history of pursuing the Codex. He's in pursuit of the Codex to defend his home Sith Morcaine from invading fiends. He requests the opportunity to copy some of the rituals of the Codex in exchange. He can assist the party in moving forward. If the party agrees, he opens the path forward. If they grow antagonistic toward the drow or refuse, he uses invisibility and leaves. The party moves on to a challenging combat with a Black Earth priest, cultists, sacred stone monks, and a young Zorn. I think this is one of those situations where it might be difficult to communicate to your party that everyone agrees, right? Like, the dwarves are not particularly against him copying some of these rituals based off this knowledge of savings at Sith Morcaine. The drow is obviously fine just copying the rituals instead of taking the book specifically itself. But I think that as a DM you have to make sure that you communicate that effectively. Otherwise your players are going to think they're in a we have to pick a side scenario. It just isn't the case, right?
The other part, even building off of that, just I feel like there's a lot of people that are naturally gonna be like, yeah, this is fine. Very much clear to the fact that it's the drow is hey, I don't even want the book. I just want to get the spells. I'll help you, chief. And it's cool because Sith Morcaine is an important piece of the puzzle in the season 3 and the It's just
it comes up again in season 2, so
so there are a lot of cool things that this is the first time this is mentioned, and it's mentioned in tier 1 to be later mentioned on in different mods. The other thing to note is if you're playing by if you're a DM and you're running by Theater of the Mind, you have to be very clear with how this battle map works. There's elevation differences. You have to make jump checks, or athletics checks, dex checks. Be very clear on how this elevation works. If you're on a map, you are not exempt from that either, because it's going to take time for people to get there, and you can use your, your cultists or whoever it may be, just start wailing on people.
Yeah, I would say even if you're gonna do Theater of the Mind, make sure you at least look at the map as a reference point to kind of give yourself an understanding of the layout.
Yeah.
There's two different maps here. One is a top-down and one is a profile view. You need to familiarize yourself with both to understand like the floating elevation situation.
Yeah.
The idea is like there's platforms suspended in midair. They're not being held up. They're not stalactites or stalagmites. They're just like floating, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of have to get your head around that and communicate that well to your players. I like this combat. I think it's cool. I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
The Zorn makes things extra challenging. The Black Earth or the Sacred Stone Monks make things challenging. There's a lot going on. Maybe 4 stat blocks is a lot to keep track of in a tier 1 mod, so just be aware of that, I suppose. If you're going to cut stuff, I might just cut the cultists, or, like everything else kind of like stacks up and is meaningful for the CR and the challenge to the party. But, use your judgment, I suppose.
I think it's a full 4-hour mod, though. It can run shorter, depending on combats and the like, but I think that this is a nice wholesome mod.
Sure.
It makes the Black Earth cult not look like a bunch of clowns. To one degree or another. It makes like their cause actually look good.
Sure.
They didn't have a intellect devourer just show up and just like, do that thing. It was like, hey, like we're actually a relevant group. Yeah. I think this is a nice little pickup at the end of tier 1.
Yeah, the conclusion here is nice about the dwarves destroy an elemental node, which is
good,
cool. Elemental nodes are supposed to be neutral things, but they're super powerful and dangerous. So taking them kind of off the board, especially when there's a lot of cult activity, is probably in the interest of stability for the region. Yeah. The dwarves aren't gonna like part with their book unless the players fight them. I don't know. I don't know that a lot of players would fight them, but maybe you have particularly antagonistic players.
It is a spell book too, so like people could use spells out of it. It does have a plethora of elemental evil spells.
Sure.
It has, off the top of my head, 2, 3, 4, 6 unique spells ranging up to level 4. I'm not saying it's not a bad thing, but the best part about it is they made it very clear that they will, if they try to sell this thing, you can't find a buyer. They
also make it very clear that the dwarves are fine with you copying stuff, right?
Yeah.
So maybe they'll supervise your time with the book. I don't know.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward mod. Any other final comments?
No.
All right, so there it is, DDEX-02-16 Boltsmelter's book. Thank you so much for listening to some advice to streamline and run it at your tables. Be a good neighbor, give us a thumbs up and subscribe. Find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and Patreon. And from now until the next time, roll together.